Why being born as Chester Bennington from Linkin Park absolutely sucks. Imagine having a voice that could scream for an entire generation, while you yourself felt completely silent and unheard. Imagine selling over 100 million albums, winning Grammys, and performing in front of screaming stadiums, all while a voice inside your head was telling you that you weren't enough. Most people know him as the frontman of Linkin Park, the man whose raw, piercing vocals define the sound of the 2000s. But the real story of Chester Bennington isn't about the rock star lifestyle or the chart-topping hits. It's a haunting, deeply human narrative about why being born Chester Bennington was a lifelong battle against a darkness that started long before the fame arrived. How did a man who gave so much hope to millions struggle to find enough for himself? To understand Chester, you have to look past the tattoos and the lights, back to a childhood in Arizona that was shattered before it even began. Chester wasn't just a sensitive kid. He was a survivor of things no child should ever endure. Starting at the age of 7, he was subjected to horrific sexual abuse by an older friend. It went on for years because he was too afraid and too ashamed to tell anyone. This wasn't just a bad memory. It was the foundation upon which his entire identity was built. A foundation of fractured trust and a feeling of being fundamentally broken. By the time his parents divorced when he was 11, Chester felt like he was drowning. He turned to drugs and alcohol at an age when most kids are just learning to ride a bike. He was using cocaine and meth before he even reached high school, trying to numb a pain that was already too large for his body to contain. He was the kid who got bullied, the kid who was picked on for being skinny and different. He once described himself as a knockaround at school, someone who felt like an alien in his own skin. But he had one escape: music. When he eventually moved to Los Angeles and joined a struggling band called Zero, which would later become Linkin Park, he wasn't just looking for a job, he was looking for a way to scream without being silenced. When hybrid theory dropped in the year 2000, it changed everything. Songs like Crawling and In the End weren't just catchy radio hits. They were Chester's literal journals put to music. He was singing about his abuse, his paranoia, and his self-loathing. The world responded because, for the first time, someone was saying the quiet parts out loud. But fame is a double-edged sword. For Chester, every time he went on stage to sing those songs, he had to reopen his wounds. He had to go back to that dark place every single night to give the fans the authenticity they craved. While Linkin Park became the biggest band in the world, Chester was fighting a war on two fronts. On one side was the physical addiction, and on the other was the mental health struggle that he called the bad neighborhood in his head. He famously said that when he was alone, his brain was a dangerous place to be. He described his depression not as a sadness, but as an entity that followed him, waiting for the lights to go out. One of the most tragic layers of Chester's story is his friendship with Chris Cornell, the lead singer of Soundgarden. They were two of the greatest voices in rock, and they shared a bond forged in mutual understanding of the darkness. When Chris took his own life in May of 2017, it shattered Chester. He performed Hallelujah at Chris's funeral, his voice breaking in a way the world had never heard before. He had lost his anchor. 2 months later, on what would have been Chris's birthday, Chester decided he couldn't fight the tide anymore. His death wasn't a choice made in a vacuum. It was the final result of a decades-long struggle with a monster that had been chasing him since he was 7 years old. But if you stop the story there, you miss the point of why being born Chester Bennington actually mattered. He didn't just suffer, he transformed suffering into a bridge. There are millions of people walking the earth today who say they are alive because of Chester's voice. He took his deepest, most shameful secrets and turned them into a universal language. He made it okay to not be okay. Even in his darkest moments, he was known as the kindest, most energetic person in the room. He would spend hours talking to fans, hugging them, and telling them that they weren't alone. He was a father to 6 children whom he loved fiercely, and he spent his final years trying to stay sober and healthy for them. He was a man who was constantly trying to reach the light, even when the shadows were pulling at his heels. The tragedy of Chester is that he saved everyone but himself. But his legacy isn't his death. It's the massive shift in how we talk about mental health in music. Before Chester, rock stars were supposed to be untouchable gods. After Chester, they became human. He stripped away the ego and showed us the plumbing of the human soul. He proved that success, money, and fame are not armor against the internal battles we all face. He showed us that even the strongest voices can be weary. Being born Chester Bennington meant carrying the weight of 1,000,000 people's pain on top of your own. It meant being a lighthouse that was slowly running out of fuel while still trying to guide ships to the shore. We live in a world that is finally starting to understand that mental health is just as real as physical health, and much of that understanding comes from the raw honesty Chester left behind. He wasn't just a singer, he was a mirror. When he screamed, we heard our own frustrations. When he whispered, we felt our own fears. If there is a lesson in his life, it is to check on the people who seem the strongest. It is the reminder that kindness is a choice we make every day, often despite the pain we are carrying. Chester gave the world everything he had until there was nothing left for him. He was a man who saw the beauty in others even when he couldn't see it in himself. Next time you listen to a Linkin Park song, don't just hear the melody. Listen to the man who decided to be honest when it was the hardest thing in the world to do. He didn't lose his battle, he finished his race, and he left behind a map for the rest of us to find our way out of the woods. He reminds us that even in the middle of the darkest storm, there is a voice that understands exactly how you feel. To understand the sheer scale of the weight he carried, you have to look at how he functioned in the years between the world tours. Chester wasn't just a guy who felt down occasionally. He described his depression as a physical presence, a bad neighborhood in his mind that he was forced to walk through every single day. He spent years in and out of recovery, battling an addiction that seemed to wait for him in the shadows every time he stepped off the stage. The contrast was exhausting. On one hand, he was the hero of the nu metal era, a man whose voice could command 100,000 people to jump in unison. On the other hand, he was a father and a husband who sometimes struggled to even find a reason to get out of bed. His bandmates often talked about how Chester would show up to the studio and pour every ounce of his agony into the microphone. There was no filter. When you hear the 17-second scream in the song "Given Up," you aren't just hearing a vocal technique. You are hearing a man physically expelling his demons. He would leave the recording booth shaking, drenched in sweat, completely depleted. He gave his life force to the music, believing that if he could just get the pain out of his chest and into the speakers, it would finally leave him alone. But the relief was always temporary. He was caught in a cycle of purging his trauma for the world, only to have it refill the moment the silence returned. Even when he was at his lowest, his commitment to his fans was bordering on the supernatural. There are countless stories of Chester staying behind for hours after a show, long after the rest of the band had left, just to talk to the kids who were standing by the barricades with scars on their wrists. He didn't just sign autographs. He listened. He would hold their hands, look them in the eyes, and tell them, "I know, I feel it too. Just stay." He was acting as a lightning rod for the world's collective grief, taking in everyone else's pain while his own cup was already overflowing. He felt a terrifying responsibility to be the one who survived, to be the proof that you could be broken and still be successful. But that responsibility itself became a massive burden. He was terrified of letting people down, terrified that if he showed how much he was truly struggling, the lighthouse he had built for others would stop shining. He often spoke about the other Chester, the one that wanted to self-destruct. He treated his mind like a separate entity, something he had to negotiate with every morning. This internal negotiation is what made his later lyrics so haunting. While the early music was about external anger and frustration, the later albums like "One More Light" were a soft, desperate plea for connection. He was reaching out his hand, hoping someone would grab it before the current took him under for good. He wasn't just singing songs anymore, he was writing his own epitaph in real time, hoping that by being honest about his fragility, he could find the strength to stay.